In the last lecture, I gave a sort of very high altitude overview of this idea of transformative experience and this idea that it creates a kind of problem, right? For Paul, transformative experience is radically unfamiliar experience. She calls it transformative because she thinks in a way, it changes you because you now know how much to value this kind of experience. You didn't before because it was so unfamiliar. So in these lectures, I want to dig a bit deeper into this problem. I'll lay the problem out in this lecture. I'll talk a bit more about Paul's argument in detail in the next. So I think one of the things we need to talk about to understand Paul's argument, if for no other reason than she makes such a big deal of it, is this idea of rational choice. You'll hear rational choice theory. And rational choice theory is just an idea or a method for evaluating choices. Now I have some problems with rational choice theory. I am not as impressed with it as Paul is. I'm not as wedded to it. But I do think it's worth saying a bit about it because, I think it has some pretensions for being like some sort of science that it probably isn't. But I do think it gives a very common sense way of thinking about choices, at least at base. And I think, we can see at least the basic idea and see why Paul is worried if this basic idea doesn't work. So rational choice gives the following model to evaluate your choices. When you're making a choice, you think about the possible positive outcomes of that choice, all the good stuff that might happen. Then you multiply the odds that the good stuff will happen minus the negative costs times the odds they'll happen, right? Think of the good stuff that might happen. Think of how good the good stuff is. Well, with no choice is it guaranteed to happen probably, so you think about, well, the chances the good stuff will happen, how good is it? Then we think about the percentage chance. Then we subtract the bad stuff. We ask ourselves, well, how bad is the bad stuff? Then we think about how likely it is the bad stuff will occur, right? Benefits and costs of a possible choice. Compare that with the other options, right? That's really all super abstract. If you start trying to fill in numbers here, this gets super complicated really quickly, which is one of the reasons I'm not sure it's a super helpful way of thinking about choice. It's one of those things that looks impressive, and then when you actually try to make it work, it really doesn't. But, well, that's just my take on it, right? But, yeah, you'll notice Paul never actually tries to make it work for real choice, though, right? But I think the basic idea here is not so crazy, even if we don't use these elaborate mathematical formulas, right? Basic idea is, think about how good the good stuff is. How likely is it? Think about how bad the bad stuff is. How likely is it, right? So here's an example, right? Imagine that you're thinking about going on a picnic. The weather's a little unsettled. There might be a thunderstorm, by the time you get out to have your picnic, or it might clear off, right? You don't know which. Right, if you're doing that, you'd probably think, well, how much do I like a picnic? And how likely is it to rain, right? You know how much you like a picnic. You know how much you're going to dislike it if you drive an hour out to your picnic spot and it starts raining. You can tell how likely it is to rain. You look at the weather report, 10%, 20%, 30%, right? You balance all that off. You decide whether you go on your picnic or not. But to do this, you need to know how much you like going on a picnic, right? If it's one of your favorite things in the world to do, you might risk it even if there's like a 20, 30% chance of rain, right? Picnics are just meh. Even a 10% chance of rain might be enough to keep you home, right? Or another, you know, getting takeout from a restaurant that's really inconsistent, right? We all know these restaurants, sometimes it's just incredible. The next time it's not that great at all, right? Or it's not as good. You know, should you get takeout from this place? Well, you need to know how good is, say, the burger when they're really on their game. How often are they really on their game? And how bad is it when they're not on their game, right? Is it amazing when they're on their game and just slightly less amazing when they're not? Or is it really good when they're on their game and terrible when they're not, right? What's the experience like of getting a good burger from these people? How often when you order do you get a good burger versus what's the experience of getting a not so great one? How often does that happen, right? And now look, as I said, I'm maybe not quite as impressed with rational choice theory as Paul is. When you get into it, they try to give you a lot of fancy math and all this stuff to really dress up this basic idea. And, like I said, it looks great. I'm not sure it actually does much real work, right? But the basic idea here, without any of the fancy math, is, I think, a pretty sound one, right? How much do you like the good outcome? How good is it for you? How bad is the bad outcome, right? And how likely is each? Well, here's the problem. To know the value of an option requires that you know what it is like for you. Think of if you've had a type of food before, you know what it's like for you. You know how much you like it, right? I know that I like chocolate quite a lot. I know that I really like apples, right? Not as much as chocolate, but apples are pretty good. Brussels sprouts are kind of a neutral for me. Beets are a mild negative, right? Not everybody's like that, right? My wife, for her, loves Brussels sprouts. Beets are a mild positive, right? I think raisins are okay. I like them. I don't usually go out of my way to eat raisins, but they're pretty good, right? There's raisins in, every now and then I'll actually eat raisins on their own. And if there's raisins in some food, generally I think that's pretty good, right? Raisins are a nice addition. My wife absolutely hates raisins. Absolutely hates them, right? For me, raisins, mild positive. For her, huge negative. For her, Brussels sprouts, huge positive. For me, not as big a positive. For her, beets, mild positive. For me, I'll eat them, but I don't really like them, right? So think of all the stuff, to know how much you like, to know whether you like the taste of this food, to know how much, on top of whether you like it, you need to know what it tastes like for you. If you've never had a kind of food before, well, if you don't know what it tastes like at all, how do you value it, right? And Paul will say this holds for a lot of other stuff. Well, so if we need to know what something is like, if we need to know what the experience that results from a choice is like, to know how much we should value it, how do we know what the experience is like? Well, in a lot of cases, simply memory, right? How do I know what it's going to be like when I eat beets? Well, I just remember what it's like to eat beets, right? What I know what it's like to eat raisins, I just need to remember what it's been like to eat raisins for me, so on and so forth, right? For cases that are really familiar, you just need to remember. Maybe it'll be a little worse, a little better. I've actually eaten beets that some people have made that I've actually kind of liked. I can't cook them in a way that I like. But, generally I know that they're not going to be incredible for me, right? I just need to remember what these taste like for me. In less familiar cases, you can rely on your imagination, right? There's a kind of tea, lapsang souchong. It tastes just like like normal black tea, except it's really heavily smoked. They smoke it with pine needles. If I'm describing this to you now, you can probably think, okay, what would tea taste like if it also had a smoky flavor on top of the tea taste, right? If you've had chocolate before, but you'd never had dark chocolate, if somebody says, well, it's less sweet and the chocolate flavor's more intense, that probably would give you a pretty good idea, right? You can imagine what this tastes like. Or if you want to go really familiar, imagine you've never had jalapeno peppers on a burger before, but you know what a cheeseburger tastes like, you know what jalapeno peppers taste like. You can probably get a really good idea of what the two flavors together taste like, right? Even if you've never had it before, if you saw that on a menu, you'd be like, okay, I like hot stuff. I like the taste of peppers. I like the taste of a burger. Seems like that would go well together, right? Well, but Paul says, all right, but what about radically unfamiliar cases? This essay I gave you guys by Paul is actually pretty short, pretty manageable. One of the things I like about her book a lot better is she has a lot more memorable examples there. And one example of something radically unfamiliar is eating a durian fruit, right? These fruit, I have no idea what they taste like. Some people are supposed to really like them. Some people are supposed to really hate them. For the people who like them, they taste really sweet. They have this sort of flavor, they say, kind of like custard. It's really fruity. It's really nice. Kind of like strawberries, but not really, people say, right? The thing is, these things stink. They stink terribly by all accounts. And the people who hate them describe them as just nauseating, right? Some people take a taste of them and love them. Some people hate them. And what both sets of people agree on is, I can't give you any halfway decent explanation of what this thing tastes like. Let me just quote a few. I found an article. It had 20 different ones. I'm not going to go through all 20, but I'll just give you some of the explanations that people who like it and people who hate it have given. So here's one from Frommer's, the travel guide. Tastes lightly sweet and deeply musky. I have no idea what that even means, right? I can't tell whether they liked it or not. So here's a few more descriptions. One person says, it tastes like completely rotten, mushy onions. Another, on the, guess which side that person's on the not like side. Another person who likes it says, yes, I freely admit that when ripe, it can smell like a dead animal. But you get down to the pale, yellow, creamy flesh, and you'll experience overtones of hazelnut, apricot, caramelized banana, and egg custard. That's my attempt, but words fail. There's really no other fruit that tastes like it. Finally, and I like this one because I'm not 100% sure which side the person falls on, like eating ice cream in an outhouse. Look, I have no idea what this fruit tastes like, right? I don't know what it tastes like. I don't know if I would love it. I don't know if I would like it. I don't know if I would dislike it. I don't know if I would hate it, right? I don't know whether it'd be a positive experience for me, and I don't know how positive it would be if it were. I don't know if it will be negative or how negative it would be if it were, right? Some people, it seems people either love it or hate it, but I'm going to guess there's people who fall in the middle who say, well, I kind of like it, but I can't get over the smell. I don't know. But the point being, I have no, I know how good it would be for me to get chocolate or bananas or raisins or beets, I have no idea how good or bad it would be to get a durian fruit because I cannot imagine what this thing would taste like for me. Some other examples, she mentions Vegemite, the sort of yeast condiment is supposed to be really salty and strong flavored, but people can't describe what it tastes like, right? Lived in Germany for a bit. A few things there that like hard to describe. There's like a kind of liquor. I think the fruit's called quince. I don't know. Never seen it in the States. They make liquor out of it. It doesn't taste like anything I've ever drank before, right? Not bad. Also, not my favorite thing, right? Family I stayed with for a while, the father loved this stuff. I was like, it's okay. Ebbelvoy, apple wine, really, really sour kind of apple cider. Again, it's really hard to describe what this stuff tastes like if you've never had it. I'm going to bet that you guys have your own examples of this kind of stuff, right? You know what it tastes like or smells like or whatever sense you have in mind, but you really can't describe it, right? And, if someone else, you imagine if you tried to describe it to somebody else, if they had never experienced it, they'd have no idea what it's like, right? Well, here's Paul's point. If these things are so radically unfamiliar, if you don't know what it's like, how do you know how much to value the experience? And if you don't know how much to value the experience, well, how do you know how much to value the choice in question? Now, you guys might think, well, for little trivial stuff like whether to eat this fruit, who cares, right? You might never have a chance to eat one. If you have a chance to eat one, flip a coin, right? Same with Vegemite, whatever. Who cares? The worst that happens is you have a mildly bad experience. Maybe you gag a little bit. You can say you've done it, it's over, right? But when it gets to bigger things, Paul thinks there's a huge problem, right? If it's whether to eat a durian fruit or take a bite of Vegemite, you can just shrug and say, all right, whatever, I'll either do it or no, I don't feel like it today. No problem, right? For big stuff like having children, you need better reasons for it than just to shrug and say, well, whatever, I'll take a chance or I don't feel like it today, right? You need really good reasons for these big choices. Well, here's the problem though. Let's focus on children, right? To know whether you should have children or not, Paul will say you need to know how much you will value having children versus not having children, right? The experience of having children with all that entails versus the experience of not having children with all the alternate stuff that entails, right? If you have children, you'll have children. They'll be rewarding. You'll get to see them grow. You'll get to do stuff with them. But they'll get in the way of doing a lot of other stuff that people who don't have children can do, right? So which choice do you make? Well, if you don't have children, how familiar are you with what it will be like to have them, right? Paul will say, if you haven't had children yet, if this is your first child, the whole experience of having children, raising your own children, is really unfamiliar to you. You don't know what it is like any more than I know what it's like to eat a durian fruit, right? You might have some vague ideas that you will like it, but you don't really know because you don't know what it's like. And if you don't know what it's like, you can't value having children or put any value to it because you don't know how good the experience is for you or even if it will be good for you. So Paul's conclusion here, if you don't know what it's like to have children, then you can't know whether having children is in fact valuable for you or not. You can't know whether you should do it or not. So now that we have all this on the table, let me put this together and give you guys sort of Paul's general argument, distilled, and also the sort of specific argument she makes with having children or not having children. So Paul's general argument is this. To know what choice you should make, you must know the value of the options, right? You need to assign a value to the different options before you can make a good choice, before you know what choice you should make. 2, to know the value of the options, you must know what the experiences that result would be like or are like. 3, to know what an experience is like, you must have had that experience or one relevantly like it before. Right? You don't necessarily have to have an experience exactly like it, but you need to have one that's similar enough, right? If you've never eaten dark chocolate, you probably can have eating milk chocolate or whatever is probably relevantly similar enough that you know what it's like, right? But if there's no experience you've had that's relevantly like it, if it's really different, right? Milk chocolate probably tells me what dark chocolate's like, but does eating strawberries, which some people say are kind of sort of, but not really like durian fruit, tell me what it's like to eat a durian fruit? No, right? So have to have an experience like, you have to have that experience before or one relevantly like it, basically close enough, right? If you don't have anything close enough, you don't really know what it's like. So 4, so in cases that involve radically unfamiliar experiences, you cannot know how much to value the options, or at least whatever options involve these radically unfamiliar experiences. Therefore, in cases that involve radically unfamiliar experiences, you can't know which choice you should make. For little stuff like durian fruits or, other food or whatever, Vegemite, this might not bother us, but Paul, if it's true, it should bother us a whole lot for big stuff like having children. So here's her specific argument about parenthood. And it basically just applies the conclusion from the last argument, right? In cases that involve radically unfamiliar experiences, you cannot know what choice you should make. When choosing whether to become parents, non-parents do not know what it would be like to have children. She's going to say, think about having children. It's so radically different from any experience you've had before. You just don't know what it's like unless you've done it, right? If you've babysat children for other people, that's not the same because, it's a limited amount of time. They're not your own children, so that makes another difference, right? She talks about the experience of having children, whether you're a father or a mother. There's probably just this hormonal instinct or something that's triggered in a way that it's definitely not when you're just babysitting, right? Just doing stuff like that, thinking about, imagining what, whether you want to have children or not, that's not going to do it either. So unless and until you actually have a kid, you don't know what it's like. So 3, the choice of whether to have children for a childless person or persons involves a radically unfamiliar experience. That is the experience of actually having children, right? You might know how much you value your current choice or your current life, not having children, so you can think about that choice. But the alternative, the competitor, actually having children, You don't know what it's like, Paul will say, so you don't know how much you should value it. Therefore, non-parents cannot know what choice they should make. So hopefully you guys see Paul's general argument and also the specific one about parenthood. Well, look, I won't get too deeply into the logic of this, but this is a valid argument, or at least can be constructed into one. You might need to tighten up a few nuts and bolts. But here's the question then, right? If it's a valid argument, are the premises true? Well, 4 and 5 are just drawing out the implications of the previous premises, so let's not look at them, right? 1, I'm not sure about 1, but it seems pretty solid to me. But 2 and 3, right? Do we accept either of these? If we're going to push back on Paul's argument, I think it's 2 and 3 to ask ourselves whether we accept these. Is it really the case that to know the value of the options, you have to know what the experiences that result are like? There are a few ways to challenge this, and, I do want to talk about both in the lecture after the next one. 3, to know what an experience is like, you must have had that experience or one relevantly like it before. Well, is that true either, right? Is that really the only possible way? There might be other ways, and that's what I want to talk about in the next lecture. So we'll talk about premise 3 and possible challenges to it in the next lecture, and then in the final lecture, premise 2 and some challenges to it.